Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, May the 14th. Wes Streeting is expected to quit as Health Secretary today to launch his leadership bid against the Prime Minister. But does he have the 80 colleagues going with him to trigger a contest straight away? Since Downing Street is telling us that he doesn't. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Yeah, more ministerial resignations are expected if Wes Streeting does go over the top today, as we think is going to happen, as allies were telling us yesterday is going to happen. So strap in, it's going to be another day of turbulence. But there's another big intervention this morning at 6 a.m. that will upend everyone's calculations in The Guardian and ITV News. And that's from Angela Rayner. The former Deputy Prime Minister reveals the news that HMRC has concluded its investigation into her tax affairs and she has had to pay back £40,000 in back taxes, but no penalty. In an interview with ITV, she doesn't rule out standing, but repeatedly makes clear she doesn't want to plunge the knife into Keir Starmer, who she's been speaking to just in the last few days. And at one point actually says it's time to stand together.
And Angela Rayner sounding distinctly lukewarm about that Wes Streeting candidacy. Asked what would happen if he did stand, she said that was Wes Streeting's choice. And, you know, if he's got the support and the people are going forward, well, that's up to Wes. Which is a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that she is signalling that she wouldn't allow a Wes Streeting candidacy to go ahead unchallenged if, for instance, Andy Burnham doesn't make it, but we'll come on to all of that in a moment. But I have to say, Anne, that the reading through the transcripts and the interviews, she sends all sorts of rather mixed signals. Like at one point, she sounds like she's trying to sort of slow things down. She says, I really feel that what we need to do now is take stock of the vehicle for change and what it looks like. So she accepts there's got to be change at some point, but says there needs to be some more thinking about what that looks like. But on the other hand, very simply, the decisions are helpful to the HMRC decision is helpful to Rayner. And with all of this uncertainty about the future of Andy Burnham and whether he's got a seat or whether he doesn't, then I think that there is just a bigger chance than there was yesterday that she ends up being the soft left candidate. One little extra thing to note, that the signals in the interview are so mixed as there's actually had to be additional briefing on top of the interviews to help us all understand what she's saying. The briefing amounts to Angela Rayner isn't hell-bent on the job. She's a team player, but if required, she'll step up and she's confident she'll get the numbers. So 2 interviews and 1 briefing later, that's the situation.
I like the idea of having to run subtitles across the interview. Say, I would think what this person may be telling us. Top trolling, I think, as the playbook is pointing out for these interviews, 2 interviews, Guardian and ITV, to drop on Wes's will he, won't he day. Particularly nice detail here, Sam, you are a connoisseur of political timing, that she did get this information back, this ruling back from HMRC on Tuesday. Now, you could say she just wanted to take stock of how she was going to present it, a great relief to her, and that she doesn't have to pay a fine. So that's a good outcome for her. But, you know, it has been timed, I think, to make life a bit more difficult for Wes Streeting as well. And I think, as you point out, to say that she is there if required. I also noted that her tone, Angela Rayner's tone, can be very heated, very fiery when she wants it to be, but this was all about slowing things down, wasn't it? It could be read maybe as a way of slowing it down to get Andy Burnham back and making herself available for that, saying herself that she wasn't going to trigger a contest against the Prime Minister. But do you think it's also a bit of a note of contrast between herself and Wes Streeting? Anyone who was in the room at that famous or infamous Spectator Awards when they sparred publicly with each other, it was very amusing, but there was definitely politics underneath it. And I think she is, by saying that she wants actions, not just words. She says, I don't think it's a case of each person for themselves. It's how we can pull the party together. Do you think she's drawing a kind of character distinction here between herself and Wes Streeting, who is seen as ambitious, who is a good communicator, but that can lead to the charge, that he's a bit of a self-publicist? That was just the way I was looking at it.
Yeah, I do think that her anger to Wes Streeting comes through, particularly in the Guardian interview. At one point, she says, "Whatever Wes is doing, he has to justify his actions." I was out last night on the Commons Terrace for a little bit, and the bottom line is that there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt. We're in a dealing with a Labour Party that's got to decide its future, but also knows, as we were saying yesterday, that it has committed an enormous act of self-harm and just doesn't know and cannot know what's going to happen next. So one of the things that will determine the path that we go down, and this is an obvious thing, but each iteration of the very likely leadership contest to come depends on how many candidates there are and who stands. And incredibly this morning, nobody knows the answer to what that's going to be. So the first question is, does Wes have the numbers? So does he even trigger a leadership contest? Does that happen? Does the triggering of the formal contest actually happen today? Or does he just go over the top and resign as health secretary and then continue to try and get it? If Wes Streeting is on the ballot, Keir Starmer says he will stand. But what then happens if Andy Burnham announces that he has got a seat and tries to slow the process down? Does that work? Does that not work? And if it doesn't work, is somebody from the soft left going to jump in, Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband, and make it a three-way contest? A three-way contest are all but impossible to predict the final outcome. In that scenario, actually, do people start forgetting about Keir? I think it's hard to overstate how little we know this morning about where we're going to end up in a couple of days, because the number of candidates, one, no contest, two or three, changes the direction for Britain, quite frankly.
And so many variables, as you point out. Some things are set to continue as usual, or nearly as usual. Wes Streeting is due to give a pool clip on NHS waiting times. Well, let's see if that goes ahead, given the expectation that he could quit Cabinet and launch a leadership bid this morning. That would be a busy time for Wes. And I think this is where you get into the waiting for Wes and how long that can go on. So rival camps were out and about telling a playbook that Streeting had been making what they called pretty desperate calls to MPs in order to get that number, to get those 80 names to trigger the contest. And the Telegraph were adding that they were also looking for people who would lend their votes to trigger the contest, and then they could switch allegiance once this, as you described it, multi-factional, multi-outcome races is underway. So you could read that as operationally quite good practice. You just get your guy into the race, and then you can say to people, look, if you really change your mind later, or you've got someone else in mind, that's fine. But we need to basically rush and a push to get the Prime Minister into a contest. And then the Keir stubbing it out tactic is, well, if you can't get the names, and it's going to be purgatory for MPs who back a challenge, and their careers are really not going to be glorious if the Keir continues. So I always come back to the fact I think Keir Starmer is actually operating a quite effective, a limited but effective bureaucratic playbook here, as you just don't really acknowledge that much else is going on, and you smoke out everybody else to put out their positions, and then you can punish them later if you're still Prime Minister.
I do detect the hand of Richard Hermer looking closely at the Labour rulebook in order to advise Keir Starmer on his tactics in this. I think the bureaucratisation of the Downing Street defence is a brilliant way of analysing it, because it does seem to be exactly what's going on. There was also sort of a fever almost about allies of the Prime Minister in the last 24 hours. So convinced were they trying to present themselves that Wes Streeting doesn't have the numbers and Andy Burnham doesn't have a seat. There was a sort of almost weird elation when I bumped into one of them last night that they were winning this. I mean, that may turn out to be just hubris, and we will see where that goes. What is definitely true is that the fight back by the Prime Minister was sort of taking form, and ministers and MPs were trooping in and out of the PM's Commons office yesterday.
Playbook's overnight account is the PM launching his fight back by seeing groups of ministers in his office to talk them out of joining the coup. Very personal appeals. I mean, someone who was in one of those encounters saying, "Oh, if only Keir Starmer had done more of this previously, we might not be in the situation we're in." But one leading 2024 Minister, Josh McAllister, did say to his face that he ought to set out a timetable. Not a good line to break the ice with Keir Starmer, that one. But it's interesting that there are people who are still prepared, relatively junior, but very determined that option should not go away, to have a measured transition, and that they're prepared to say that to the Prime Minister.
I found a new clutch of arguments that allies of the Prime Minister were using last night and this morning. One minister pointed out to me that if there is a contest that drags on into September, then everybody's fuel bills are going to go up because the fuel escalator automatically comes in September. And ministers in the Keir Starmer government had been expected to reverse that, but that's a mighty great tax and spend decision. And it's hard to do if you are having a contest over the Prime Minister job, because you're effectively in government purdah. And that principle that sort of big government decisions go on hold is applicable to all sorts of different difficult things that will happen in the coming months. Indeed, somebody was pointing out to me that, what will happen to the budget and the wider public finances if there's a leadership contest that goes until October? Then the OBR needs 12 weeks before it can have a budget. So who wants a Christmas Eve budget, anyone?
We're about the only people who kind of wouldn't mind that, actually.
Oh, no, Anne, I would. Even me. But I know what the Tories would call arguments like that. They would call that Project Fear. And I always thought two things about Project Fear. First of all, that it never works, right? It never cuts through. The arguments just annoy the people that they're designed to convince. And then the second thing I thought about Project Fear, and this may well be true, is that the arguments were correct. When you went back to it, you realised that quite a lot of the points that were being made ended up being the right ones. They just convinced nobody at the time.
I like the Project Fear idea, and there's a lot of that about the Kierkegaard action, as the playbook puts it, is underway, and that is absolutely what is being rolled out on the Starmer side. So you've got the key allies, Rachel Reeves, Darren Jones, not just schmoozing the tea rooms, the terraces, saying, "Look, stick with the Prime Minister, we're going to get this back on track and it'll be really good for you." The love bombing. But I think you're also getting the fear bombing strategy, and the central message that a leadership election would mean the government essentially shutting down, being in a state of purdah for months, holding up key legislation, giving these MPs, who are desperate in many cases — I speak to a lot of the North East MPs who are facing that reform surge, and a lot of them are very cross, and some of them have been joining the outright rebellion, but there are those who haven't, who are just waiting to see what they're going to be given to work with, and saying, if you do this, you will just hand reform another great tranche of votes and arguments, and then it'll all be your fault. So that was something that someone said to me, I just happened to bump into this week, who'd been in a very senior position in a government abroad. He said, yeah, the argument that had weighed most with them about whether they should stick or twist with their leader, say they got it wrong, all the rest of your life you would be thinking, I should have done differently, it was all my fault. The trouble is, at the moment, Labour MPs see that very differently, don't they? Some of them think it'll be their fault if Keir remains.
We'll talk about Andy Burnham in a second, but I just want to give you a bit of colour from the terrace last night.
Oh, yes.
There is a hysteria right now about the Labour Party. I asked one Labour MP whether she was pleased to be back and seeing her colleagues, because yesterday was the first day back, so it was a King's Speech. She said no. I mean, I think she said that quite sincerely. Another Labour MP said that they were here for Al Keynes's leadership contest, provided he launched with his top off. And there was also chat that maybe Andy Burnham, when looking for a seat, might just wait until potentially the investigation into Nigel Farage and his crypto gift is complete. And if he's found guilty, there's a recall petition. Maybe Andy Burnham could go for Clacton and launch his leadership bid from there. So all sorts going on, but that takes us neatly to Andy Burnham. What's going on there?
I love the idea of the Clacton showdown. The BBC reporting, meantime, that Burnham last seen in London on Monday. It was, I think, not unintentional that he was just sort of snapped, showing that he does show his face in the capital, has pulled out of his usual weekly Radio Manchester slot today. Now, he was citing the need to prioritise discussions arising from last week's local elections to get the best deal for Greater Manchester. Slightly Pravda-style lingo at these statements. I feel I've translated a lot of these from Russian in my time. Discussions arising from the situation in the regions. Comrade style. But I think it's Burnham's way of keeping up a sense of armed neutrality here, Sam. It's easy to forget, as things have moved on so fast, he was the one who launched the first challenge against Keir, as we were at Labour Party conference when that happened, and what a big drama that was, and that it was rebuffed by Starmer quite firmly. One of Burnham's allies telling me to go back to the original text of his argument then. So I did. And it's the line that they were highlighting was someone has to speak up for the ideas we need to have the plan to beat reform. And if you could put that soft left agenda in one sentence, I think that's actually quite a good encapsulation. And there is a suggestion from this supporter of Burnham that this would be his rallying cry. It's a harder argument for Starmer to say he's got the recipe right to beat reform when you look at the whirlwind of that turquoise army sweeping through the northeast seats and advancing in the regions and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, his appeal does stretch beyond the left. There are some on the right of the Labour Party who back Andy Burnham. I wouldn't be surprised if even Shabana Mahmood found that she could tuck in behind a Burnham premiership if it comes to it. But the question is, a lot of the discussion around Andy Burnham is quite soft and fluffy. We do need to know what happens with the seat. One of the repeating dramas of the last few days have been allies of Burnham repeatedly saying he's got a seat, he's about to tell us what it is, and then us getting wind of one of those seats, like Manchester Russia constituency with Afzal Khan, which got an 8,000 majority, and then we run and phone him up, and he denies that he's going to stand down for him, and that's actually happened to Afzal Khan several times. In fact, many, many times. I think he's had half of the Westminster lobby on the phone to him continually for the last 5 days, and he has denied at every turn it's him. Let's see. But in like brass tacks times, what Burnham needs to do today is the same as everybody. Everybody has to show their hand today. That's why it's going to be an incredibly important day. The circus is back in town. There's nothing anybody can do about it. And we're here for that. But let's see what happens when the final round of poker and people put their cards on the table.
So much depends on what happens in the next few hours, doesn't it? And whether the waiting for Wes epoch ends and kicks off that avalanche of consequences. One thing that I do know about the outcome of it, it's really not good for Sam Coates' half marathon training, because you got so much spare time at the moment. You can get your cardio in there, Sam.
Oh God, yeah. No, it's been a week of takeaways. I don't know what's going to kill me first, the half marathon or the Labour Party. Find out on Monday. Thank you very much indeed for listening. We will speak to you very soon.